So, how simple are thoughts in real life? Like, what is a thought? So, your brain has neurons and they're connected to each other. Imagine a whole bunch of points and a whole bunch of lines connecting them. So, you have one neuron and it fires to the next. So, neuron 1 goes to neuron 2 and 3, and neuron 2 goes to neuron 5 and 6. Okay, so it fires off and it just makes a pattern. I'm going to say that a thought is what happens when that occurs in your brain, when your neurons actually fire and your brain creates this pattern like a tree, like branches on a tree. So a thought is just that. It's just your brain firing from one neuron to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. So what I'm going to now say, and this is a supposition, it's conjecture, but that is where a thought emerges, that and thought is imparted on the universe by your brain thinking. And that's all a thought is. So I'm going to say that anything in the universe that simulates these mechanics actually imparts a thought. And there may be nothing there to experience those thoughts, but that there is a thought there, an ephemeral thought. So what is an experience? An experience is something that happens when something has a thought. So when I have a thought, I feel an experience. An experience occurs. So when a thought occurs in my brain, I have an experience. I'm defining terms for you guys so we can talk about this stuff and you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. Because this is going to get a little complicated, but I'll slowly go through it, and this will be really fucking cool because this is the coolest thing that I've ever thought of in my entire life. So I'm sharing it because I'm no longer a PhD student and I don't have access to a captive audience of people to shout at and give my ideas to. So again, a thought, just the mechanics of your brain firing neurons from one to the next. An experience, you having a thought. You experience it. Now consciousness, this is cool, is just the persistence of thoughts. It's you storing those thoughts and being able to remember them. Okay, your consciousness is just you having a bunch of thoughts in a row and having them stored there. And the medium that store it in for a human being is your brain. Okay, so let's see why these are important terms and why this could be something meaningful. Could a computer have a thought? Well, what if you simulated the mechanics of a brain? Right, so people do this. Scientists actually, they have neural networks and they simulate the mechanics of a brain the best they can. Neurons firing, chemicals firing, neurotransmitters going from one synapse or going into the synapse of the brain and connecting to a receptor and then firing down another pathway to another synapse to another brain cell. So this is something that gets simulated by machines when we just make a program that simulates these mechanics. I'm going to argue, and this is again supposition, conjecture, that a thought occurs there too, and that machine has a thought when we simulate these mechanics. All right, again, this is not something I can prove, but we're going to get back to why it's so hard to prove that a little bit later, because these are all things that are actually very meaningful. So I'm going to skip ahead and not qualify everything I say just yet, but I promise you I'll explain everything, and I'll take questions in between videos, and I'll answer them. Because I literally know that I've thought about this way too much to have waited this long to start putting it on YouTube. So a consciousness is the persistence of thoughts. Thoughts are just the mechanics of anything that produces this sort of simulation or the physical act of neurons firing, right? And I'm going to say that anything in the universe that has those mechanics probably has a thought, and I'm calling those ephemeral thoughts because there's no consciousness there, nothing to store them, nor is there anything to experience them there. So a thought could be anywhere. There could be thoughts everywhere in the universe just happening, right? And nothing to experience them. Until you have a medium there, you can't have a consciousness. So the brain is our medium to store these thoughts. And until you have something conscious there, you can't have an experience. An experience is something that happens, something that has a consciousness. I experience things when I have thoughts. Now here's what's cool. If we knew the mapping of a thought, right? If you just mapped neuron to neuron, you got an Excel spreadsheet, right? And you go neuron 1 goes to neuron 2 and 3. And then neuron 2 goes to neuron 4 and 5. And neuron 3 goes to neuron 44 and 3000, okay? So you have an Excel spreadsheet that maps out all of these transitions from one neuron to the next. So then you take that and you take it from one brain and you put it into another brain. You inject it somehow, if you were able to do so, into another brain, and you make it have a similar pattern or an identical one if you could, ideally. So would you have the same thought? So if there's any computer scientists here or mathematicians, here's what's cool. I'm going to tell you now that a thought alone is context-free. Much like a computer language is a context-free language, thoughts are context-free. A consciousness is context sensitive, meaning that the previous thoughts create a context in which we perceive the universe, or with which we perceive the universe. Okay? So consciousness is context sensitive. Thoughts are context free. And I'm wondering if I can prove this at some point because I haven't sat down for the mathematics. But if you go to xmatv.com/blog.php, I have some crazy shit on there, some conspiracy theories. Plus, I have some stuff about thoughts in a PDF file. I started writing in LaTeX at one point. And there's some cool stuff there. And it's a declarative way of expressing what thoughts are. And I make it really simple and really, really, really hyper simplify it, almost to the point of being absurd, but not quite. So it's a basic definition of what a thought is mathematically, which I think might be novel, but I'm not sure. I'm going to try to publish this shit. Next, I'm going to have an entire series where I go into what I think thoughts are, what consciousness is, and what I think the consequences of this are. And I'm going to try to do this to the point of which I have something worth publishing and have enough people telling me it's a good idea, because I'm going to try to finish. I was a PhD student in computer science. I dropped out. I was thinking of going back for a PhD and publishing in a discipline that doesn't yet exist. And I'm wondering if that's a good idea, and if this gets some traction and people are interested, I'll get the idea that people think that that's something I should spend my time on. And I'll spend my time on it. We'll see if it was worthwhile later. Matt Vaughn saying, if you could map my brain from the beginning of me saying this to right now with thoughts, and then put them in your head, what do you think you'd experience? I don't know. Would you think that you were saying the same things I was saying? Would you see the things I'm seeing? Or would your brain not know what to do with it because they're that different? I literally don't know. I don't think anybody does. But these are the kind of things I think about, and they're kind of interesting. Do you think that I could take an experience from my mind and with some sort of cool mathematics and translation layer, inject them into your brain such that you had my experiences, right down to the feeling in my fingertips or the taste of my coffee, the feeling of air on my face, the sun on my skin, the thoughts in my mind, which is recursive, isn't it? So my audience, let me tell you what I am and tell you where my audience will probably land. I'm a computer scientist, mathematician, PhD dropout entrepreneur who's had a lot of failed businesses, and I've spent a lot of my life down and out, and a lot of it with too much money, and then didn't appreciate it when I had it. I love one person very, very much and want to spend my life with them. We've had a shitload of adversity, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about the universe because I had a near-death experience in New York City 19 months ago, nearly died, woke up in Bellevue Hospital, and I was an atheist prior, and now I believe that there is some sort of afterlife, or that the universe was intelligently designed, believe it or not. So you can argue with me about that, by the way, and I'm going to argue that the null hypothesis, and this is what I'm going to get to, I think thoughts are so common in the universe that to argue that there was no consciousness throughout the universe's existence, its 13.9 billion year existence, to argue that human beings are the only things endowed with this level of consciousness would be absurd. And then further, I'm going to argue that things much more conscious than human beings might have existed, and I'm going to argue it statistically with mathematics to try to change the null hypothesis so that people assume that there is a intelligence to the universe as opposed to not. I'm hoping to shift the view just a little bit because it's assumed that consciousness is incredibly rare, and I'm saying I don't think so. After my experience in New York, I believe that consciousness is incredibly common, and that consciousness might be the most important thing in all of the universe, and that if you were the designer of the universe, that would have been what you were interested in. Not the mechanics of the universe, not the physics of the universe, although those would be important too, but you would have been interested in consciousness. Because I'm going to say something else. There are only two things that you know are real for sure, and you can't prove anything else. You know that you are a person. You know that you exist, that you are conscious. I think, therefore I am. You know that you exist. You also know that there are mathematics because you can axiomatically, you can basically arrive at mathematics regardless of where you are in the universe, regardless of what you are, so long as you are something conscious enough to come up with them. So long as you are able to discover mathematics, mathematics is there to discover. You can figure out that 1 + 1 is 2, And you can build a system of axiomatic mathematics around that. And you can use that to create a baseline of communication with anything. Anything able to do the same. So mathematics exists and so do you. But you can't even prove there's a physical universe because the only way you've ever seen it is through your own consciousness. So your own consciousness has perceived the world around you and perceived the people around you, and you assume that they actually exist because everybody says so. But who are those people saying so? Are you sure they're not artifacts of your mind? Have you not accidentally conjured them from nothing? Could you have produced them merely by imagining they exist? Could your mother be a figment of your imagination and your father as well, and everybody you've ever met or loved? Just something you thought up as a dream, and you're just wandering through this consciousness? It's possible. It is possible. But that's not what I believe. But I'm just telling you, you can't prove that there's a physical universe. So if you are a physicist and you do not believe the null hypothesis is incorrect, you might be right. However, let me tell you, you do take things on faith because you actually take on faith that there's a physical universe and you've spent your entire career studying it. Something that might not exist because you can't fucking prove it. Now I'm going to get to something a little bit more interesting to a physicist because this part you'll actually like. Ready? What if the universe was quantizable and linearizable? What if you could serialize the universe into a string, a binary string? Every element of the universe. I'm saying you can, all right? Because let's say you're an M-theory person. You like string theory? Cool. You got 11-dimensional space-time. You've got 11-dimensional space-time, Planck space-times is what I'll call it. 11-dimensional units of the universe, right? So let's say you take a giant matrix, 11-dimensional matrix that has every fucking point in the universe in it. And every point has, for that exact cell in that matrix, you're going to put the properties of the universe, all of them. You're going to enumerate every property of the universe in that cell. And you're saying that's a little bit weird because there are properties that aren't like that, right? There's things like gravity, which have to do with the attraction of things from one point to another. You could fit them in that cell. You could literally enumerate them in relation to everything else. So you could put in that cell another 11-dimensional matrix that has every fucking thing, and you could make a tuple of these 11-dimensional matrices that have everything else in the universe related to them, okay? That's stupidly complicated, and if you were to compute anything, it would take forever. Literally, probably might take forever. I'm not even joking. Forever might be the length of time it takes to compute that, because it's recursive, right? And there could be mutually recursive loops in this thing that go on forever. So it might take forever to make any computation on this thing, but I'm saying you could do this. You could linearize or serialize the universe and put it in a string by taking that matrix and taking the next dimension of it and stacking it in, right? So you just Google serialize, you'll see what I'm saying. So you put this universe in a serialized string, a binary string, and everything to compute in that string too, and then do operations on the universe, okay? That's cool, right? Yes, it is. Here's why. Now you no longer give a fuck that time is separate from space, because going from one cell to the next in that matrix of Planck spacetimes, going from one cell to the next is the same as going a Planck length or a Planck distance, one minimum of them. Okay? Planck length or Planck time, rather. It's the same thing. So by doing it this way, you could compute the universe agnostic of whether or not time is the same as space. Because you could compute it as just another dimension in your computation. The way Einstein wished us to. Isn't that cool? Yeah, like literally the way he wished us to. Because there's no separation between them at that point. It literally makes it irrelevant whether or not you're thinking about distance or whether or not you're thinking about time. And that is actually something really complicated. So I left a really complicated thing for the end of this. So that's my blog. It's probably meant for people who can think that's interesting or digest that shit. So I'm going to start it off with stuff that's really simple, and by the end of it, I'm going to try to fuck with the minds of even the people who think they're smarter than everybody else. All right? And that includes me, but I literally think it's nice to be humble about this shit, because if you don't think that I just overloaded you with stuff, then you are fucking not thinking about it. And I mean that. Okay? If your IQ is 180, and that's not really a thing, because at that point, the tests don't really fucking matter, man. You take it to one day, you get a 180, you take it another, you get 160. I promise, because one question make that difference at that point, I imagine. Here's what I'm saying. If your mind's not a little bit fucked up by what I just said to you, you're not thinking about it. Because here's one of the consequences. When the Big Bang occurred, right, we have forever since then been falling away from the beginning of time and toward the end of it, all right? We were blown up toward the end of time away from the beginning of it. So what if time is just the most flat spatial dimension? Huh? What if it is the least curved spatial dimension, and that the next three, the ones that have most of the stuff in it that we see, are just a little bit curved to the torus universe we have. And then the next few are really fucked up. Their architecture is bizarre and really curved, you know? Really, really curved. Either convex, concave. Doesn't matter in this context. It's just fucked up. I would imagine scrunched in, right? Which would make sense if most of the mass of the universe is in there, right? Not literally in there, because there's no in there to be, because it's right here with us. But like, you know, one of those Planck lengths there spans like 1,000 of them on this thing. Like 1,000 Planck lengths here are just like the fabric of them spreads out. And you know what I'm saying? It'd basically like be like stretching it so that like all around us we'd have a lot of inertia there. Maybe that keeps us from rotating along those axes. Maybe that's why we have so much goddamn inertia on those axes, that we're not like floating through them or falling through them all the time and hitting things. I'm going to leave it there because that's when I got out of my depth for a moment. So that's when I'll stop, when I know I'm starting to say stuff that doesn't make as much sense. I'm going to do this a couple times a day until I've got everything I want to have on here. And I'm going to talk about consciousness. I'm going to talk about the universe. And I'm going to talk about merging things into what I call the only endeavor. Talk to you later.